Have you ever felt like everything you thought was true began to crumble? As if suddenly something inside you opened up and life as it always was ceased to make sense? Perhaps you've awakened with a strange feeling, as if you've touched a deeper truth. Not a clear answer, but a silent calling. And even without knowing exactly what to do with it, you can't go back to who you were. If this sounds familiar, you might be experiencing what many call a spiritual awakening, a silent, intense, and deeply personal journey. But contrary to what many imagine, this path isn't linear. It's not a staircase with defined steps. It's more like a spiral. Sometimes you climb, sometimes you seem to regress. At certain moments, everything falls into place. At others, everything seems to fall apart again. Some people navigate each step with clarity. Others skip straight to the end. Some return again and again until they finally find themselves. But as unique as each journey may be, there are common threads that connect us. And that's what we're going to talk about now, the 5 stages of spiritual awakening, so you can recognize where you are and perhaps understand that you're not so lost after all. There's a reason for everything you're feeling, for this silent discomfort that insists on appearing even when, on the outside, everything seems normal. For this feeling of emptiness, of displacement, of being on a nameless journey. Maybe you felt lost, that something inside you has failed, that you've been left behind while the rest of the world moves on. But what if I told you that this very moment in your life is part of something much bigger? What if what you're experiencing right now is exactly the right stage of your awakening? In today's video, we won't give you a magical answer, but we will show you something more subtle and perhaps even more powerful, an internal map, a new way of looking at your journey. Because spiritual awakening doesn't happen all at once. It comes in waves. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it confuses, sometimes it feels like a new beginning, other times an end. But the truth is, no one is behind on their journey. Awakening isn't a race, it's a calling. And it may already be happening within you, even if until now you haven't been able to name it. Maybe what you need isn't to accelerate, but to understand. And that's exactly what you'll begin to find here. In the beginning of the journey, it doesn't even feel like a journey. There's no map, no sign, just the sense that you're surviving rather than living. Days blur into each other like watercolors bleeding on wet paper. Emotions take over like weather systems you can't predict or control. Decisions are made on autopilot, and an emptiness disguises itself as routine, urgency, and endless busyness. At this stage, the ego is in complete charge, but it doesn't announce itself as some villainous force. It shows up as you. It's the master of disguise, wearing your voice, speaking your thoughts, making you believe that its survival strategies are your deepest truths. The ego's primary function has always been survival, and in the modern world, this translates into an elaborate system of psychological defenses built around one core terror: the fear of not being enough. Your inner voice becomes a relentless taskmaster, whispering its mantras of inadequacy. You have to do better. You can't mess this up. You must not be rejected. You need to prove you're enough. And you believe it because no one ever taught you to observe your thoughts, only to obey them. No one showed you the difference between the voice in your head and the consciousness that can hear that voice. The ego feeds on validation like a flame feeds on oxygen. It creates an insatiable hunger for external approval, transforming every interaction into a performance, every relationship into a transaction. You become a method actor who has forgotten they're playing a role, so deeply immersed in the character that you mistake the costume for your skin. Here, everything feels personal. A sideways glance becomes a judgment. A delayed text message becomes rejection. A moment of silence becomes abandonment. The ego's hypersensitivity turns the world into a hall of mirrors.
each surface reflecting back your deepest fears about yourself. You don't just experience criticism, you become the criticized. You don't just face rejection, you become the rejected.
Life doesn't feel like something you're creating. It feels like something that's happening to you. You're a passenger in your own existence, watching through the window as your days unfold according to scripts you never wrote, but somehow agreed to follow. Every failure becomes evidence of your unworthiness. Every loss, proof of your inadequacy. Every disappointment, confirmation that you are fundamentally not enough. The line between what you feel and who you are becomes invisible. You don't just feel anger, you are an angry person. You don't just experience insecurity, you are someone unworthy. You're not having anxiety, you are broken, flawed, damaged goods. Everything becomes identity, and identity becomes a prison with bars made of your own thoughts. In this state of spiritual sleep, there's no clarity, only projection. You see others through the lens of your own pain, attributing intentions they never had, misreading silence as judgment, feeling threatened by their success or inferior to their happiness. Comparison becomes your default mode of perception, a constant measuring stick that somehow always finds you lacking. And the cruelest irony of this stage is that your life might look perfectly fine from the outside. You function, you achieve, you maintain relationships, you check all the boxes that society says lead to fulfillment. But inside, there's a profound disconnection. A fatigue you can't name, a sadness you can't explain, a hole that no achievement, no praise, no future plan seems capable of filling. This is what spiritual sleep really is. It's not the absence of belief or the lack of religious practice. It's the absence of presence itself. It's living with your eyes open, but your soul turned off, being physically whole, but spiritually fragmented. It's the strange paradox of being completely absorbed in your life while simultaneously feeling like you're missing it entirely. But even here, even in the deepest sleep, something magnificent is happening beneath the surface. The awakening has already begun, not as a loud announcement, but as a quiet seed planted in the fertile darkness of your discontent. It waits patiently for the first crack of light to break through the shell of your certainties. Sometimes that crack arrives as a crisis that shatters everything. Sometimes it comes as a whisper, so soft you almost miss it. But it always comes. And once it does, nothing, absolutely nothing, can ever go back to the way it was. And then something breaks. Not like glass shattering with a dramatic crash, but like ice slowly cracking under the weight of spring. Sometimes it's a loss that stops you in your tracks, a death, a divorce, a dream that dies. Other times, it's something far more subtle, an unbearable silence that opens up between what you have and what you feel. A sudden awareness of the vast emptiness that exists behind all your achievements and acquisitions. It can arrive as a crisis that turns your world upside down, a nameless grief that settles in your chest like fog, or a disconnection so profound you can no longer ignore the fact that you've been sleepwalking through your own life. The form doesn't matter. What matters is the impact, the moment when the foundation of your reality begins to shift beneath your feet. Because suddenly, you can't keep pretending. The elaborate performance that once felt natural now feels exhausting. The life that once made perfect sense now feels too small, too narrow, too shallow to contain what you're beginning to sense about existence. Certainties that once felt as solid as mountains begin to dissolve like sugar in rain. Everything you held onto, your beliefs about yourself, about others, about God, love, success, meaning, starts to fall away piece by piece. And what's left in the aftermath is a strange, pregnant silence, a sense of being suspended between worlds like a trapeze artist who has let go of one bar but hasn't yet caught the next. You're flying through empty space, and for a terrifying moment,
You don't know if the next bar will be there when you reach for it. This is the moment of the symbolic death of the ego, not a literal death, but something far more profound. It's the death of the identity you built, defended, fed, and protected for so long. The mask you wore so consistently that you forgot it was removable finally begins to crack and fall away. You realize that the person you thought you were, with all their fears, desires, and desperate needs, was never the full truth of who you are.
But this realization doesn't bring immediate relief or enlightenment. Instead, it brings disorientation, confusion, sometimes even terror. Who am I if I'm not who I always believed I was? If the story I've been telling about myself isn't true, then what is? The ground beneath your feet feels uncertain, and every step forward requires a courage you're not sure you possess. This is perhaps the loneliest stage of the journey. You find yourself in a liminal space, a threshold between what was and what could be. Everything that once felt solid and dependable begins to reveal its impermanence. The roles that defined you, the relationships that sustained you, the goals that motivated you, all start to feel hollow, like sets on a movie stage that look real from a distance, but reveal themselves to be made of cardboard when you get close. Yet, even in this disillusion, something new begins to emerge. At first, it's barely perceptible, a quiet presence that wasn't there before, a consciousness that seems to exist apart from your story. This is the part of you that watches without judgment, that feels without drowning, that sees without needing to prove or defend or explain. It's awareness itself, unconditioned and unafraid. This breaking is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of the possibility of a deeper truth. Not the truth you were taught by others, not the truth you convinced yourself to believe, but the truth that has always been there, waiting patiently beneath the noise of your busy mind and wounded heart. The old self is dying, yes, but what's dying was never fully alive to begin with. It was a collection of responses, adaptations, and survival strategies. What's being born is something that was always there, your authentic essence, finally given permission to breathe.
After the fall comes silence, but it's not the peaceful silence of completion. It's the dynamic silence of fertile emptiness, that strange in-between space where what was has collapsed and what will be has not yet taken form. It's the silence of a field lying fallow, rich with potential, but not yet sprouting. And it's in this pregnant quietude that the quest begins. The mind, for perhaps the first time in your life, finds itself unable to respond with its usual arsenal of quick fixes and comfortable cliches. The old formulas that once provided instant relief now feel hollow and inadequate. Platitudes bounce off your new sensitivity like rubber balls off a wall. The beliefs that once seemed unshakable now feel as fragile as soap bubbles. And so something deeper, something that has been dormant for years, perhaps decades, begins to stir and ask. But these are not the ego's questions. The ego asks, how can I get more? How can I be better? How can I win? How can I avoid pain? The ego's inquiries are always strategic, always aimed at acquisition or avoidance. The soul asks different questions entirely. Who am I beneath all these roles? Why does beauty sometimes bring me to tears? What is this longing that no achievement ever satisfies? Why do I feel most alive in moments of quiet connection? You feel the need to find something, but you're not entirely sure what. It's not knowledge in the traditional sense. It's more like remembering something you once knew but have forgotten. And so you begin to search with a hunger you've never felt before. In books that promise wisdom, in videos that speak to something deep inside you, in teachers who seem to carry a light you recognize but can't name. You explore meditation and find yourself both frustrated by your mind's chatter and amazed by moments of unexpected stillness. You spend time in nature and discover that trees seem to hold secrets your civilization has forgotten. You read poetry and philosophy, seeking words that can capture the ineffable experiences you're beginning to have. You might find yourself drawn to art that moves you in ways you can't explain, to music that seems to speak a language your soul understands. This is the stage of spiritual thirst, not the desperate thirst of the ego for more, but the deep thirst of the soul for truth. You no longer seek to acquire answers like possessions to be collected and displayed. Instead, you seek to remember, to uncover, to recognize what has always been true, but was obscured by years of conditioning and distraction. The search takes on a quality of secret investigation. You become a detective of your own consciousness, gathering clues about the nature of reality from increasingly subtle sources. Synchronicities begin to appear with startling frequency, meaningful coincidences that seem too perfectly timed to be random. Your intuition, long suppressed by the rational mind, begins to speak more clearly. Dreams become more vivid, sometimes carrying messages that your waking mind struggles to interpret, but your deeper self seems to understand perfectly. You discover that truth speaks many languages. Sometimes it whispers through the words of ancient texts that somehow feel personally written for you. Sometimes it shouts through a sunset that stops you in your tracks and reminds you of something vast and beautiful you'd forgotten. Sometimes it appears in the eyes of a stranger on the street, in the way light falls through leaves, in the space between thoughts during meditation. Each insight lifts a little weight off your shoulders. Each discovery lights a small candle in the darkness of your confusion, but you begin to understand that this isn't a race toward some final destination, where all questions will be answered and all seeking will cease. This is about something far more beautiful and mysterious. With every deeper question, you're not moving further away from yourself. You're actually coming closer, not to an idea or concept you can grasp with your mind, but to a presence you can feel with your entire being, to something ancient and intimate that has always been there, patiently waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice it was never actually lost. The quest is not the end of the fall. It is how the spirit begins to rise, but with more intention now, with more listening, with more truth. You're no longer seeking to escape your life, but to finally, fully inhabit it. Before we dive into how you begin to rebuild yourself, pause. Take a breath. If you've made it this far, that already says something powerful about where you are in your journey. So leave us a sign in the comments. Just type, "The mask is falling," or something that reflects what this moment means to you. We read every message. And if this resonates with you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because this journey doesn't end here. It's only just beginning. And then, almost without realizing it's happening, you begin to remember. Not facts or stories or distant memories, but something far more fundamental. The sensation of being yourself before you learned that being yourself wasn't safe. It's like rediscovering your native language after years of speaking only in translation. A veil starts to fall away, so gradually at first that you almost don't notice. You look in the mirror and see that the version of yourself you've presented to the world no longer feels authentic. It feels like a beautiful costume you've outgrown. The automatic smile that once came so easily now feels heavy on your face. The rehearsed opinions you used to express with such confidence now feel hollow in your mouth. The life you built on external expectations begins to weigh on you like an elegant outfit that no longer fits your changing body. You begin to remember who you were before you learned to hide, before you discovered that certain parts of yourself made others uncomfortable, before you realized that authenticity sometimes comes with a social cost, before you learned that survival often means making yourself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for your full presence. The authentic self starts to emerge like a shy animal venturing out after a long winter. At first, it's hesitant, fragile, uncertain of its welcome in a world that often seems to reward performance over presence. But it's also unmistakably clear, steady, and full of a truth that feels like coming home to yourself after a long journey in foreign lands. You begin to say no with a certainty that surprises you, not the angry, defensive no of resistance, but the calm, grounded no of someone who finally knows their own boundaries. You start to distance yourself naturally from places, people, and patterns that drain your energy, not out of judgment, but out of simple self-preservation. Your body becomes a more reliable compass than your mind. It knows what nourishes and what depletes long before your thoughts catch up.
Environments that once felt familiar now create an almost physical discomfort. Small talk feels exhausting. Superficial relationships feel hollow. Situations that require you to perform rather than simply be present become increasingly intolerable. Your tolerance for inauthenticity, both in yourself and others, diminishes dramatically, not because you've become harsh or judgmental, but because your sensitivity to what's real and what's pretense has been heightened. And this is when a revolutionary realization begins to dawn. Maybe the problem was never you. Maybe what made you feel broken, weird, too sensitive, too much, or not enough wasn't your essence. It was how much you had to adjust, compress, and modify yourself in order to be accepted in systems that were never designed to accommodate your full humanity. As Krishnamurti observed, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. When this quote finally makes sense, not just intellectually, but in your bones, you understand why everything has been crumbling, why you can't carry what you once carried, why it hurts so much to keep pretending. The pain you've been feeling isn't a sign that you're broken. It's a sign that you're becoming healthy in an environment that often rewards the opposite. Consider what psychology calls maladaptive daydreaming, the tendency to escape into elaborate fantasy worlds to avoid painful realities. Or think of Jung's concept of the persona, the mask we wear to interface with society, which becomes problematic only when we forget we're wearing it and mistake it for our true face. These adaptive strategies, necessary for survival in childhood or in genuinely threatening environments, become prisons when we continue using them in contexts where authenticity is not only safe, but essential for genuine fulfillment. The friction you feel when trying to squeeze back into your old ways of being isn't resistance to growth. It's your soul's intelligent response to environments and relationships that require you to abandon yourself in order to belong. Your discomfort in these situations isn't a character flaw. It's a healthy immune response to psychological toxicity. This recognition brings both grief and liberation. Grief for the years spent trying to fix what was never broken, for the relationships built on false premises, for the dreams abandoned in service of others' expectations, but also profound liberation. The freedom that comes from finally understanding that your sensitivity is not a weakness, but a strength, that your inability to just get over it might actually be wisdom, that your deep longing for meaning and connection isn't evidence of your dysfunction, but proof of your humanity. The authentic self, once it begins to emerge, no longer negotiates with systems that require its diminishment. It no longer fits behind the mask, and every attempt to squeeze back into that old container becomes increasingly uncomfortable. This isn't defiance or rebellion. It's simply the natural response of something real encountering something artificial. That discomfort you feel when you try to shrink yourself again, that internal scream when you attempt to perform the old routines, that is your return. That is your soul refusing to abandon itself again, and it can only be heard clearly when you finally stop performing and start existing. When you choose presence over perfection, authenticity over approval, and truth over comfort. The emergence of your authentic self isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a practice you commit to daily, moment by moment, choice by choice. Eventually, like morning slowly breaking after a long night, a moment arrives when the questions begin to quiet down. Not because you found all the answers and solved the mystery of existence, but because you've learned something far more valuable: how to live gracefully with uncertainty, how to dance with paradox, how to be fully present without needing to understand everything. You stop chasing some imagined future version of yourself where everything will finally make sense, and you begin walking with presence, step by step, breath by breath, exactly where you are. The desperate reaching towards some distant enlightenment transforms into a gentle settling into this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this perfectly imperfect now. Life doesn't become perfect. Pain doesn't disappear. Challenges don't evaporate. But something fundamental shifts in how you relate to it all. Life becomes present in a way it never was before. You begin to accept yourself with a gentleness that would have seemed impossible during the earlier stages of your journey, not because you've transcended your humanity, but because you finally learned to embrace it fully. The wounds are still there, but now you tend to them with the same care you might show a hurt child, with patience, understanding, and love instead of criticism and impatience. You stop trying to rush your healing, stop pushing yourself to get over it according to some arbitrary timeline. You begin to understand that your pain isn't a problem to be solved, but an aspect of your humanity to be honored and integrated. This is the stage of alignment, when body, mind, and spirit are no longer at war with each other, but functioning as parts of a coherent whole. You no longer live primarily in reaction, constantly responding to external triggers and internal wounds. Instead, you live from choice, not the ego's strategic choices aimed at getting or avoiding, but the soul's authentic choices arising from your deepest values and clearest seeing. The past no longer defines you because you've learned to relate to your history as a story that shaped you but doesn't own you. The future no longer pressures you because you've discovered that this moment contains everything you actually need. And the present, which was once either ignored or endured, finally welcomes you home. Think of a river flowing around obstacles in its path. It doesn't rage against the rocks or demand that they move. It doesn't try to break through what cannot be broken or change what cannot be changed. Instead, it finds a way, sometimes over, sometimes around, sometimes under. The river maintains its essential nature while adapting fluidly to the terrain it encounters. This is what alignment feels like. Maintaining your authentic essence while moving gracefully through whatever circumstances life presents. You begin to see others with more softness, not because they've changed, but because you see yourself with more compassion. The harsh judge that once lived in your head and criticized everything you did has been replaced by a wise friend who sees your struggles with understanding and your efforts with appreciation. This inner transformation naturally extends outward. Relationships deepen, conflicts resolve more easily, and even difficult people seem less threatening because you're no longer carrying the wounds that made everything feel so personal. Your relationships shift. Some fall away naturally as you outgrow dynamics based on your former, smaller sense of self. Others deepen as you bring more authenticity and presence to them. New connections form that resonate with who you're becoming rather than who you used to be. Even your silences feel different. They're no longer empty spaces to be filled with noise, but rich pauses pregnant with presence and possibility. You discover that you are not here to fix yourself. You never were broken in the way you thought. You are here to live yourself fully, completely, authentically. With everything that includes your light and your shadow, your clarity and your confusion, your strength and your vulnerability, your moments of transcendence, and your perfectly human struggles. Looking back, you can see that even the detours had meaning. Even the pain served a purpose, pushing you inward when the outer world couldn't provide what you were seeking. Every part of the path, including the parts you cursed, resented, and wished you could skip, were part of the calling that brought you to this moment of recognition. You haven't arrived at some final there, some ultimate state where all seeking ends and all questions are answered, but you realize with a quiet smile of understanding that there was never the point.
The point was always the journey itself, the gradual awakening to what was already always present. The point was always you, whole, present, awake, and finally willing to be exactly who you are, exactly where you are.
If you've made it this far, it's because this message found you at the right time. So while you're here, take a moment to check out our latest video. Stop being emotionally available to everyone. Carl Jung was right. In it, you'll discover how Carl Jung's philosophy shows us that learning to say no and setting boundaries isn't coldness, it's a profound path to inner peace. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider joining us so you don't miss the next steps in your journey. Until next time, take care of your mind, your soul, and your truth. You're not alone on this path. Not anymore.